Thank you all for coming to Data. This is definitely the most exciting workshop of the conference. I'm sure you're all thinking that. So before we even start, just think for a couple of seconds, what are like the biggest problems, biggest headaches, challenges that you face as an organization with data that you're hoping that we'll solve today? So just think about that for a second. Write it down, whatever. Just think about it. Okay, we've got some ideas. Hopefully we'll solve all of your data challenges today. We're going to go into a lot of depth. This is an hour-and-a-half long session, so we're going to get really detailed and nitty-gritty. So hopefully it'll be really useful for you. I'm Lindsay O'Gan. Right now I'm currently the data analyst for San Antonio Pets Alive. I helped start Austin Pets Alive in 2008 with Dr. Jefferson. When we first started, we knew we needed a good data system. We didn't know what we were doing, so I kind of helped build all of that and construct all of that, and then we did the same thing down in San Antonio. I went down there and helped them kind of get all their data systems in order, so I'm pretty familiar with starting up data systems with nothing. But I want to point out, I've also worked as like the vet clinic manager for Austin Pets Alive and the neonatal manager at San Antonio Pets Alive, so I'm really familiar with how hard it can be when you're in the trenches to actually manage data. I know sometimes when you've got a cute, fluffy puppy in front of you and you're trying to save its life, data a lot of times can take the backseat and not really be a priority for staff. So everything that we talk about today, sometimes it's going to seem overwhelming and like there's no way we can manage all of that data. There's no way we can do that. But I want to assure you that you can. We've made it as streamlined and efficient and easy as possible. With or without computer systems, whatever you've got in front of you. So you can do it, your staff can do it, even if they're working super hard and in the trenches, it's definitely possible. Let's see. This is my email address. Every year at these conferences, I give out my email address and nobody ever emails me questions and it makes me sad. So email me questions, things I don't cover today, anything, please email me. I'm happy to answer your questions. So I was supposed to be doing this birds of a feather Q&A after lunch, but I'm hearing that maybe that's not happening. So I'm hoping by the end of this session, somebody's out finding out from me right now. So by the end of this session, we should know if that Q&A is actually happening or not. I'm not sure, but anyway, hopefully it is. But even if it's not, if you have questions, of course you can ask them at the end, or you can email me if we run out of time, which we might, because we have a lot to go over. Okay. So what are we talking about today? This is our who, what, when, where, why. Why does data matter? We're going to talk a lot about that. You guys might care about data. You're here, so I'm assuming you do care about data, or maybe you are forced to be here by your executive directors. But I'm going to go into a lot of detail about why data matters because I want you to be able to go back to your board of directors, go back to your staff, and actually get them to care a lot about it, because if they don't care about it, they're not going to do a good job managing it. So I want you to have a lot of talking points for why it matters. Where to store it all, who does all of this work, how to move all this data around, and when to update it. So we're going to go kind of into a lot of detail about all of that. Okay, so what data? We're going to be talking for an hour and a half about these 3 bullet points, which seems like that's impossible, but I promise there's so much behind all of this. So where do your animals come from? What happens to them while they're in your care, and where do they go? That's everything we're talking about today. We're not talking about people data. I want to point that out. We're not going to be talking about like volunteer data systems, like volunteer tracking systems, or employee management systems like ADP. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about animal-specific data software. One thing I want to mention is whenever if you don't already have software systems in place, whenever you're looking for your software, you might try to find a software that does a good job of animals and volunteer management and employee management, and I don't really believe software like that exists. I think software is kind of specialized nowadays. And so whatever's really good for managing your animals is probably not going to be the best system for managing your volunteers, and that's probably not going to be the best system for managing your employees. We have 3 totally separate systems for managing animals, volunteers, and employees, and I usually recommend that. It's kind of more of a headache to have multiple systems, but if something is trying to manage all 3, it's probably going to do kind of a bad job of all 3, if that makes sense. It's better to get specialized. So we're just talking about animal systems today. Okay, so I said 3 bullet points, but it's actually this. Don't write that down. So intake, where they came from, there's lots of different ways they get into your system. What happens to them, that's medical, behavior, marketing, locations, like physically, where are they in the world? And then outcome, what happens to them? Where do they go when you're no longer the owner? So I say 3 bullet points, but that actually breaks down into all of this. So that's why we're going really deep into the animals today. One thing I'll mention is you might be looking at this and being like, we're a small organization, we're new, we don't need to do all of this. Like, we don't do any of our own medical, or we never take in owner surrenders. We only take animals from a shelter, whatever. But also be thinking long term. Where are you going to be in 5 years? At San Antonio Pets Alive, when we first started it, we never took an owner surrender. But I made sure our software was set up to be capable of taking an owner surrender, because after several years, we did start taking the rare owner surrender animal. And if I hadn't set the software up like that originally, when we wanted to take in an owner surrender, we wouldn't have had a way to process that in our system. So just keep that in mind, even if you're like, we don't do half of this stuff up there. That's okay. Hopefully you will someday as you expand and grow. And so you want to just have your system capable of handling it, even if it's not. Okay, so why does it matter? Most of your staff is going to look like that cat. They're not going to care about data. They're going to be bored with it. But it's super important. So we'll just go over some key points on why it actually matters. Legal ramifications is a really big one. Your computer systems, your data systems, they can help you define ownership. And as we all know, animals are property in the eyes of the law. For most people, they're the equivalent of a car as far as legal ramifications go. So if you have somebody who surrenders their animal over to you, you are now the legal owner. But if you didn't have them sign that animal over to you on a piece of paper that you saved, how do you prove that you're the legal owner of that animal? So let's say you adopt that animal out, and then the original owner comes back asking for their dog back, and you've already adopted it to someone else. Do you have a system in place where you can super fast go on the computer, pull up a copy of their signed form and show it to them? Or are you just like, oh, well, you told me I could have your dog. I don't have any paperwork. You know what I mean? So defining ownership in a physical paperwork and a computer system is really important for you to prevent lawsuits. Veterinary records, if you're providing any medical services to your animals, there are a lot of laws regarding how you manage your veterinary records, and it varies from state to state. Texas, I believe it's 7 years you have to keep all your veterinary records. If you have an actual veterinarian coming on site and doing medical and you're managing the records, you're actually managing them for that veterinarian, which means their license is on the line for your good record keeping. So if you keep poor records or you lose your records or whatever, and the state board investigates, your veterinarian can get their license in trouble if you're not doing your records properly. Even if it's got nothing to do with the vet, it's not their fault at all. So having a really good data system in place is important if you're doing anything medical. And even if it's not a veterinarian, even if it's just technicians or whatever giving vaccines, you still have veterinary record laws you have to follow. And then contracts with outside agencies, if you're ever planning on having a contract with like the city or Best Friends or any of those organizations where you do a contract to get money, a lot of times they're going to want to know what animals you've saved, where they're at, what are all of their outcomes. And so if you don't have a good computer system that can tell you that really quickly, you're going to have a problem with your contracts. We have a contract in San Antonio with the city shelter, and they pay us a little bit of money per animal we pull, and every month they want to know where every animal we've ever pulled from them is. So every month I write a report that says where 30,000 animals over our course of all of our years have gone. If I didn't have a good computer system, obviously I wouldn't be able to do that. So like I was saying, reporting, PR, obviously if you want to be able to make news releases about how many animals you've saved. We saved 500 kittens this year, that kind of thing. You want to have a good computer system that can report that back to you easily. We already said contracts, grant writing. Every grant is going to want detailed reports. So you need a computer system that can provide you detailed reports to write a grant. And you want it to be very detailed. So sometimes we ask for a grant specifically for sick puppies. Well, can you run a report out of your system that says how many sick puppies you saved last year specifically? if you can't run that report, you can't ask for that grant. So you can get money if you just have a good computer system. Internal audits and goal setting. So every year we sit down and we say, okay, last year we saved 800 kittens. How many kittens are we going to save this year? And we can look specifically, okay, our foster program will have to increase by 10%. Our on-site nursery will have to increase by 10%. We can really do some good specifics for goal setting for our organization by running these reports. And then staff performance. You can set good goals for your staff if you can run reports. So we track every adoption that's processed. We track who adopted that animal out, what counselor did. So then we can run reports and say, Joe, you're doing a lot less adoptions than everybody else. What do we need to do to bump that up? Or we can even say like somebody's doing way too many adoptions. Maybe they're not doing the best screening, and so we need to work on that. We can look at reasons animals were returned on average. We can run reports on how many dogs were returned because of the military, moving overseas. And so then we can look at ways to prevent that in the future. So you can run a lot of cool reports if you have a good system. And then tracking staff that works from home. If you have any staff that works from home, we have a little bit that does. How do you know what they're doing at home? Are they really working, or are they on Facebook a little bit but clocked in anyway? If you have a good computer system, you can run a report and say, hey, you only processed 3 adoptions last night, but I saw you were clocked in for 5 hours. What happened? That kind of thing. So reports can help you with staff performance measures a lot too. So it's not as fun as fluffy puppies, but it's really important. And setting it up early is a big deal, and it might be too late. Some people might already be running and not have a data system and you're trying to catch up. But if you have the option of getting things set up and structured early on in your organization, it makes your life just a whole lot easier than trying to catch up later. Okay, so where should we store this data? So at APA and at San Antonio Pets Alive, we use PetPoint software. Some of you are probably familiar with PetPoint. Some of you might be groaning internally about PetPoint. Every software has pros and cons. We just like PetPoint the best. We're not like paid by PetPoint. We don't get anything from PetPoint for talking about them. I want to point that out. They don't even, I think, know we do this presentation. But this is the software we use. I've test-driven a lot of other shelter software systems, and they're all good and they're all bad, but this one I think is, for us, the best. Let me show you. This is what our system looks like. And so this is just like sort of a front page of an animal. There's a lot more to it than this, but you can kind of see that in a software system like this, you should be able to look the animal up and really quickly be able to see everything you want to know about the animal. And a really nice thing about PetPoint is it has that animal view report over there in the corner, that green button in the top left corner, top right corner for you. And it will, if you open that up, it tells you every single thing about the animal ever. Medical stuff, intake stuff, behavior stuff, everything ever. So it's nice if you have a software system, be keeping in mind if you can, is there a way to look at everything about the animal in one place? If there's not, then you might want to look at a different software system. That's one of the biggest headaches, I think, in certain systems, is you have to open different screens to see the medical or behavior or whatever. So I like that PetPoint has this. And some have that capability, but PetPoint's one that does. If you're interested in PetPoint, it's technically free, which seems kind of crazy, but it's true. There's caveats. You have to use their microchips on your animals. Their microchips are pretty cheap, comparatively cheaper than Home Again and stuff. So it's not a bad thing to use their microchips, but you have to if you want to get PetPoint. You have to give away their free insurance, which isn't a bad thing to give away free insurance with all of your pets. And you have to advertise for them on your website. So it's free-ish, but it's free. That's kind of amazing. If you're interested in joining, there's their website and phone number. They provide all of their training for free. They'll train your staff for free. All of the setup, you can personalize it, customize it, and all of that is free. Again, that's kind of crazy. Their tech support, I think they might have started charging for like advanced tech support, but I think their basic tech support is still free, like emailing tech support. I recommend having your team leaders involved in your data management system from day one, especially if you're like kind of starting from the ground up or reworking a lot of things. Even though your dog adoption manager is not really going to be that interested, Try to get them involved in the setup on the phone conference calls with the organization when you're getting your data system set up, because if they're involved from day one, they're going to have more buy-in and they're going to care about it, and they're not going to cuss about the software system so much and complain about it so much. When you kind of push software onto management, they're a lot more likely to hate it. So if you're able to get everybody in one room, all your upper management, and have them go through the training, everybody together, they'll have more buy-in on it. Okay, so that's where we store our paperwork. So there's two different kinds of paperwork we're talking about here. There is your overall data system, which is sort of your synopsis summary of everything that's happened to your animal, right? It's your kind of cloud-based, web-based, hopefully web-based software system. But then there's also physical paperwork. And you might be paperless, but we never managed to be paperless. I don't know, I can't imagine being paperless as a rescue organization. But if you can manage that, that's awesome. But if you can't, if you have physical copies of adoption contracts that are signed, owner surrender forms, medical forms that the doctor fills out, whatever, you're gonna need somewhere to store the physical paperwork, copies of the paperwork online, and then you have your separate data storage system. Does that kind of make sense? So our data system, it doesn't have like a copy of the signed contract in it. We just type the owner's information into our data system, if that makes sense. The copy of the signed contract, we do scan in and we keep it online because you need to have that stored online so you can access it easily. And so I recommend cloud storage for that. There's a million cloud storage software systems, so you can pick whatever you like best. Dropbox is an option. It is not free. It costs a little bit of money if you upload a lot of stuff to Dropbox, but it's a nice online cloud, very secure system that you can upload all your paperwork to. Or just Google. If you have a Google work account, and Google will give you a cheap work account if you're a nonprofit, you don't have to pay a whole lot for it. And so what we do, and we'll talk about this in more detail in a minute, but if you email a document to someone and they don't delete their email, that document, that attachment is saved in that email box forever. So if you have just an email box that everybody emails all their paperwork to, then all of that paperwork is stored in that email box, and that can be considered a cloud storage system. So that's a very easy option if you don't want to use like Dropbox or something more complicated. But so you want online copies of everything, owner surrender forms, anything anyone's signed, anything anyone's written on, behavior notes or whatever. You want it online, and we'll look at how to make that happen. And then your physical copies. What do you do with your physical adoption contract? So you scanned it in, it's in the cloud, somewhere on the internet, and then you've got this physical piece of paper. We don't actually have fabulous answers to that question. It depends a lot on state law. Some states require like veterinary records. Texas, if you have handwritten veterinary records, even if they're typed in the computer, you still have to save those handwritten records somewhere. Other states don't have those kind of laws, so some of it will depend on what state you live in. Sometimes some groups just rent a storage unit for $30 a month and fill it with boxes of old paperwork, and that can be a legal option for you. Some organizations shred it. I know some vet clinics shred their paperwork, so if you are overwhelmed with physical paperwork and your laws don't require you to keep it and you're positive you've got it stored online somewhere, maybe consider shredding it. I would definitely recommend keeping filing cabinets somewhere in some office somewhere where you can put at least like the last 6 months worth of physical paperwork, because no matter how good your systems are, you're going to have an adoption contract that somehow doesn't get put in the computer, or vaccines that accidentally don't get put in the computer. And then you've got a foster who's saying, I know I got him vaccinated, and your computer doesn't say that, so you want to be able to go to that filing cabinet and find that piece of paper. So you don't need to keep those forever, but I wouldn't immediately shred them as soon as you upload them. I would keep them for at least like 6 months in a filing cabinet, maybe a year. And not just like immediately send them far away, because you'll need access to them. Okay, so who is going to manage all of this data? You might need a data manager, data analyst, whatever you want to call it, part-time, somebody to kind of manage your data team. Austin Pets Alive grew so much that they don't even really have a designated data manager. All of their data systems are so smooth that they kind of don't need that position anymore. So that's possible. If you do have one, it'll probably be a part-time position. You might be able to just give that to, a dog adoption counselor or somebody who's really awesome at computers. They could do it part-time. It doesn't have to be a full-time position. And then you'll need data entry staff. So let's look at these 3 bullet points really quickly, because this is something we've struggled a lot with, and we think we have really good systems in place. So entering data at night or as you go, a lot of brick and mortar shelter facilities will have a person sitting at a desk in front of a computer doing data entry as they go. So the dog walks in, you're surrendering it, I enter that owner surrender form immediately, scan it in, wait for the next person to show up, I process adoptions, whatever, right? In front of a desktop computer. So the downside to that is that if nobody's walking through the door, you've got a person that you're paying to sit there who's not doing anything. And that can happen, right? You have this big rush after work, but you don't have anything going on from 2 to 5. Or if you have a big rush and you have 5 people who want to do an adoption and all of your people at the computer are overwhelmed, are they getting mad and leaving because you don't have enough people to do your data entry right then? So there's definitely cons to that. The other way you can do it, and this is actually the way the APA and SAPA do it, is we just collect all that physical paperwork as the day progresses, and I'll show you how. And then we scan it all in at once and email it to a system, and that goes to the data team. And then at night, after 7, 8 o'clock at night, once all the facilities are shut down, they actually open that file up and just sit at home and do all the data entry right there. Bam, 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 get it all done. So you're only paying them to do that data entry solidly in a big block of data entry, and then as soon as they're done doing the data entry, they sign out, and you're not paying them to sit there and do nothing. The downside to that, of course, is that the data isn't updated immediately, so you take in a litter of kittens, they're not in the computer until the next morning, but we haven't really found that causes too many hiccups, because how much stuff do you need in the computer the same day they come in, right? You're doing all their medical, you're doing all their whatever that day, but you probably aren't going to really need them in the computer system on the same day that they come in. So we do all the data entry at night. And a lot of times if you have a lot of off-site adoption centers or you have a ton of satellites working, which we do, we have our parvo ward, we have our kitten nursery, we have several adoption centers around town, you're not going to be able to have a data entry person at each one of those satellite locations. So just having everybody gather their data up all day long and then submit it all at night, and the data entry team enters it at night, works really well for us. Working from home is, in my opinion, the best way to deal with data, because you don't have to pay for them to sit. You don't have to have a desk. You don't have to have an office. You don't have to have a computer overhead, nothing for those people. Wi-Fi access, all of that expensive stuff. They do it all from home. And one really nice thing about people who do data entry from home, it's usually not their full-time job, right? These people who just work for 4 hours in the evening a few days a week, it's usually a part-time job. They're either stay-at-home moms or dads, they're going back to college, it's a second job, something like that. And so they're very flexible. If you have a ton of intakes one day because you did a huge shelter pull or something, you can call somebody and be like, hey, can you jump in and help with data entry tonight? Everybody just kind of works together, gets it done. And if there's only a couple of animals that got intake that day, then they just do their couple animals and they're done. It's so flexible if they're working from home. Or if someone's like, hey, I'm sick, I can't work tonight, someone can pick up really easily without having to drive to your facility. So having them work from home is super nice for that flexibility. The only downside is managing their productivity. If they're at home and not working very hard, it's really hard to manage that. But again, if you are worried about it, you can run a report really quickly, see how much work they did that night, and see if it makes sense. So it's pretty easy to manage them from home if you need to. And then volunteers are paid. We have tried to have volunteers do data entry. We have not had any success with that. Data is one of those few things that touches every single part of the organization. And so if you had a bunch of cats come in that day and none of them got put in the system, and then the next day they're getting adopted or they're needing medical treatment and nobody can look up their medical records online, the adoption counselors are freaking out because these animals aren't in the computer system. It can cause problems in every part of the organization if the data doesn't get entered properly. And it can also, like medical data, if it's not entered properly, if you have a heartworm test entered as positive and that dog was actually negative, that can have pretty big medical consequences for an animal, right? So we have found that we generally need to pay people to be, and we're going to look at how much that will cost your organization to pay someone to do your data entry. Volunteers, I think, are good for non-essential data, which would be like uploading pictures, uploading biographies, uploading videos. Most of your marketing stuff is going to be non-essential. And so if that doesn't get uploaded that night, the animals, it's not going to cause a big crisis if pictures aren't uploaded that same day. So having your volunteers do marketing and stuff. And try a volunteer. If you're a small organization, try having a volunteer do your data entry. But we haven't had a lot of success with it, unfortunately. So this is how much it will cost you to pay people to do it. So this is based on 100 animals per week, 50 minutes per animal, so that's from start to finish, from intake, entering all their intake, owner surrender notes, all that stuff, their intake medical from previous vet clinics, entering our medical that we do on them the whole time they're there, so spay and neuter and vaccines and illnesses, everything, marketing information, behavior information, everything that happens to them, and then the outcome, the adoption contract, all that stuff. So that takes us 50 minutes per animal. If you have less stuff happening to your animals, it might not take so long. 100 animals per week, so you're looking at like 430 animals a month. That's going to take you about 83 hours a week, plus if you have a data manager working 10 to 20 hours a week. So that's around 2.5 full-time employees per month that you would need for your data systems, and that's about what we run. If you're paying them $11 an hour, which in some areas, that's a lot. In some areas, if you're paying someone to work at home and it's their second job, you don't have to pay that much. Just depends on where you live. That runs out to about $4,700 a month. The biggest determination of how much money it's going to cost you is how quickly people can type. I've hired a lot for data positions, and I would always put, you have to type a minimum of 50 words per minute in my job description. That's a pretty good minimum, I think, 50 words per minute. And people will be like, oh yeah, I can do it. And then in the interview process, I sit them down with a free online typing test and make them prove it. And they don't. They type like 20 words per minute. And so if you think about it, that would double your cost if people are typing half as fast. It's going to double your cost for data entry. So the faster people can type, the better off you're going to be. So if you're hiring someone, make them take a typing test. If you already have data entry people, make them take a typing test. And if they're really below what you want them to be, have them work on that, give them classes or something to get them typing faster, because it's going to make a massive difference in how much money you spend. All right, so here we go. How do we get all this data everywhere? There's so many moving pieces. How do we get it everywhere? What we use is called an end-of-day report. You're going to hear me say EOD a lot, end-of-day report. Basically, this is a comprehensive report filed by staff. So I said we're not sitting and entering the data as the animals walk in. So the animal walks in, the person fills out their owner surrender form, behavior form, your medical team does their medical intake, they fill out their, what vaccines they gave, all that kind of stuff. Maybe your behavior team does an analysis and does their behavior stuff. So you have this big stack of paperwork with this dog, right? So then that gets set over here. I'll show you an example of where we put a little wall holder. And then all day long, you've got all your cats, your dogs coming in, whatever. So it's all going in this thing. At the end of the day, the manager takes all that stuff out and scans it all in and sends it off. It happens anywhere something is happening to animals. So this happens in our Parvo ward. They have their own Parvo EOD. The kitten nursery has an EOD. The PetSmart at Ingram has its own EOD. Every location, everywhere anything is happening to animals, one of these is happening. And that actually includes foster managers, because even though the foster manager doesn't have all the animals in their house, they're managing who's moving around from foster home to foster home, who got adopted out of a foster home, right? So the foster manager should be submitting an end-of-day report as well. And then you can scan it and email it. That's, of course, the easiest way. If you have one of those multi-page scanners, that's super nice and easy, right? If you don't, a fax machine, there's all kinds of online fax services now, like myfax.com, where you can get a fax number, but you don't actually have to have a fax machine. So let's say you're at PetSmart. PetSmart all has landline fax machines. All PetSmarts and Petcos have these things. So if you sign up for MyFax, you have your own fax number. So they go to the fax machine and they type in that fax number and send it, and it just gets uploaded into an email that is then sent to your data team. So people can fax things to you, but you don't have to have a fax to receive it, if that makes sense. And you can send things out on myfax.com too, actually, via email. It's kind of cool. If you're really low tech, you don't have computers, you don't have access to this fancy stuff, take a picture with your cell phone of the data and email it. Take a picture of that adoption contract, take a picture and text it to someone. It doesn't have to be a computer or a tablet or something fancy. Our adoption sites, we don't have tablets at all of our adoption sites or anything like that. So sometimes it's just taking a picture of documents and texting it over. Oh yeah, must be every day without fail at the end of the day. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna implement this cool end of day report. It's gonna be exciting. And then day one of your sites is gonna be like, I'm sorry, we were so slammed. There was no way we had time to compile our end of day report. We'll get to it in the morning. And then the next day, they're going to be so slammed and they're not going to get to it, and it's just going to back up and it's not going to happen. So you have to make it a hard and fast rule. No matter what, it has to be done at the end of the day, that day. It doesn't matter how busy you are. And a lot of times what we do is if we have staff who's struggling with this, we say, okay, whoever the manager, whoever's in charge of it, they need to stop working 15 minutes before they're actually done for the day, go hide in an office and lock the door and pretend like they're not there and do their paperwork. And that sounds crazy, but that's what you have to do sometimes, because sometimes it's like, I want to bottle feed this kitten, but I got to do my end of day report, so I'm just going to go hide and pretend like I've already left. So you just have to have that culture. It's every day, and then it happens every day. This is what that MyFax looks like, myfax.com. It's cheap. It's free if you don't do a lot of faxing. So this is the vet clinic's bins. The vet clinic has their own end of day report. So it's just one of those cheap things you stick on the wall from Walmart, and it separates it. So you can have an intake section, adoption contract section. It kind of depends on the location, what they're doing at that location. But the vet clinic is doing surgeries, intakes, and wellness, so then it's separated for them to make it easier at the end of the night to compile it. It just makes it faster. And this is a go-to place for staff, because the manager's not handling all of the paperwork, right? You've got staff doing all these adoptions. You need a go-to place that adoption counselor knows they just run and throw it in that bin and go back to work. Okay, so the end of day synopsis is a cover sheet that goes on all that paperwork. You've got this big stack of paperwork, but what if a page gets eaten by the scanner, by the fax machine, or one of your text messages doesn't go through? You need a checklist that the data team can look at and say, wait a minute, you told me there were 6 intakes and you only sent me 5 intake papers. We're missing a piece of paper, right? So this is the synopsis. This is a low-tech option of a synopsis. We don't use these anymore. You can see it's kind of old, but it's an option. Something handwritten that they can take a picture of with their cell phone if you don't have access to a computer. It's totally an option, It's an easy option. It's not ideal, because if there's bad handwriting, you're going to maybe make a mistake, or you're going to have to call Sarah and say, hey, I can't read that A number. What's that A number say? So it's not ideal, obviously. You'd rather have it typed, but it's an option. Or have it, if you have kind of unreliable internet, have a few of these in a drawer so that your internet's out. You can just handwrite it and take a picture and send it to the data team so they at least know, I need to be watching out for those 3 adoptions so they don't get missed. This is the email version of the end of day report. This is the one version of an online version of it. That's super easy. So what we do with Google systems, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, there's Google Groups, which basically a Google group is you go into Google and you add a bunch of email addresses to a group, and then that group gets a name. Like this group is called cat-eod at sanantoniopetsalive.org, or Austin Pets Alive, I think, on this one. And so I email one email address, cat-eod, and then that Google group automatically forwards it to the 10 people that are a part of that group. And that includes the data team managers, whoever needs a copy of this end of day report. And so this synopsis is, they just quickly fill it out. They just fill in the little blanks of, and you can track money, supplies. So this goes to our office manager who sees the supplies list and puts out pleas for people to donate supplies, or they go buy whatever they need to go buy. So it's kind of a nice way to organize that. Head counts, we have 15 animals, so people can say, hey, they have 15 animals, but 20 cages. We need to send some animals to this location. So anyway, so this is an emailed version of the end of day synopsis. I'd recommend it. It's searchable. That makes it really nice. You can search in the future. Checks and balances. Anytime you're dealing with data, you're going to have mistakes happen. You need to have checks and balances so that you can catch mistakes immediately. So something that we have struggled with in the past is, let's say a dog gets adopted from the on-site location, but the contract, the counselor sets it on the desk and it slides off onto the floor and nobody sees it. It doesn't end up in the end of day report. Now what do? That dog got adopted, but the computer system says it still lives at the on-site adoption center, right? So you need to have some kind of checks and balances in place. We're going to look at a couple of checks and balances. One of them is the daily census that would catch that kind of problem. And we'll look at that in detail in a second. Another checks and balance you can have is, let's say that paperwork does get sent to the data team, but the data team's flying through the data and they just miss a contract. They just don't enter it in the system. So what you can do is tell the data team, in the evening, print a report of everyone that you took in the computer system tonight. Print a report of that and look at it and compare it to your end of day synopsis and make sure it matches. And then they can be like, oh, I only did 5 intakes, but there's 6 intakes on this end of day synopsis. What did I miss? Let me go back and find it. And every day you miss something, right? I mean, it's just human nature to make mistakes. So try to work those. If you're having problems, things aren't working, try to think, how can I create a checks and balance to catch problems? So let me tell you about the census briefly in case it's not in here. So it's really easy. So basically you just, every morning, you go into your computer system and you say, okay, how many animals does it say I should have and who are those animals? I have Muffin, Fluffy, whatever. And print out a report of who all is supposed to be at your shelter. And then you take that report and you physically walk around from cage to cage and make sure that those 10 animals are actually at your location. And you do it every single day. Your manager does it. You can have a volunteer do it that's there cleaning cages. They can be marking animals off of the list as they go. But then that way, if, let's say, an adoption contract got lost, you're looking at your piece of paper and you're like, Muffin, wait, Muffin's not in this cage. He's supposed to be in this cage. And you can say, something's not right here. Make a little note, keep going, keep going. And then you go and ask, hey, Muffin's not in his cage, but it says he's in his cage in the computer system. And they can be, oh, Muffin got adopted yesterday. So then they can just tell the data team, hey, data team, Muffin got adopted yesterday, but he's still showing up in the computer. And then the data team can say, I never got an adoption contract. And then they look around and they physically find the adoption contract. If you're not doing a daily census every single day, you're not going to catch those kind of mistakes until a month from now when someone's like, hey, Muffin is still in the computer. What's going on? Nobody remembers the adoption. Nobody knows where Muffin is. Now you've got an animal that's lost in your system, right? So if you just do a daily census, have your managers do a daily census at every single location, go in the computer, see who's supposed to be there, walk around, check them off. It'll save you some time. Okay, we're supposed to take a break before we get into details, so let me just go forward. There we go. Because we're going to go into some really nitty-gritty details, so.